Hello everyone and welcome back to my bookish channel. I'm Paul and it's Mars with a G. I haven't said that for a while. It's Magrs, but it's pronounced Mars. I'm a writer and I'm a reader, and I spend most of my time in this study, working from home. And on this channel I've been talking about books that I've got around the place. The whole place is filled with books. And Bernard Socks, my cat, is often here to help. He's climbing up on the chair opposite right now. There's a painting in the way, which he's going to be annoyed about. Can you see him? There he is. Socks! Nope, he's not bothered. Right. Today I thought I've been clearing out shelves a little bit on the bottom of that bookcase there. I guess with the idea of doing something in the next few videos that somebody suggested about compiling a forever shelf. I mean, really, I've got a bookcase in the bedroom, which is my forever bookcase. Everything on it is the stuff that you would sail away with to that desert island. And I don't know if I could compress it to less than whatever that is, 7 or 8 shelves. But I'm going to give it a go. I also need to compress some of these books as well in order to get rid of some. And I've been talking about that in the last week or so. I know I'll probably not get rid of anything, but I keep seeing things here and there thinking, do I need that forever? I've got this tiny pile of things that I will get rid of from this year, things that have uh, been disappointing or just I don't want in the place anymore because they've annoyed me so much. Here's AJ Finn's End of Story. As I said before, I can still see it on my shelf up there, The Woman in White. Sorry, The Woman in the Window a couple of years ago. It was fabulous. Halfway through this, I lost the will to live. Don't know why. I think he writes in a kind of slightly fussy way, a bit pleased with itself, maybe the tone of it. That is going. It looked so good. There was a whole load of kind of cozy, life affirming bookstore or department store. Come in and have your life changed. A bit like When the Coffee Gets Cold, that kind of story where every chapter's a kind of fabular story on its own, and they all pay into this major uh, story which pulls it all together. And this is the Dalagut Dream Department Store uh, by Mai Lee, and I couldn't stand it. I thought it was terrible. I didn't want to give negative reviews. This also hyped everywhere. Um, Dull. Lots of cats books around, but this one wasn't the best. Traveling Cat Chronicles. Um, when things are so kind of light and airy, they barely touch the ground. It's that kind of thing. Jodi Picoult, I had trouble with. This was another book club book. Halfway through this, and I just felt the weight of research on my shoulders the whole way through. I just felt like I was reading pages and pages of explication. Um, it was a bit schematic, and uh, yeah, I was meant to learn something from it all the time, which drives me mad when people do that. I love learning new stuff from books, but from novels, but it has to be in such a way that I'm kind of hoodwinked into it. Not that I'm being, shoveled with all this uh, stuff that you need to know. Issues. God, I can't stand issues. Anyway, those are all going. Say goodbye. There'll be more. There'll be more to go. Apart from that, looking at this shelf along the bottom there was a real rag bag of things that uh, I need to talk about. I guess I'm going to end up talking about every single book in the house. It was a mixture of things I have read and haven't read, which is interesting. Usually I keep them quite separate. These are the shelves of things I've read. Here are the heaps of things I'm yet to get to. There's something else that's going out, which is a real shame. Northern Stories, Volume 2 from about 91. This, well, it was at Lancaster Literature Festival. I was a student in Lancaster, and the Literature Festival was a big deal. Um, and every year they would have this competition, and they produced this quite fancy anthology of short stories. And I picked up two copies of it in a charity shop nearby, quite by chance recently, and it seemed like this is an amazing find, really, and lots of names I recognise from figures at the time. This is 1990, but I read the introduction and it just annoyed me so much. I can't even tell you why. The preface, the introduction, is so patronising about um, the general standard, and the competition. The general standard in this competition was higher than 2 years ago. This time, however, blah blah blah. The fella goes on to talk about the North and stereotypes. And I don't know if it sets out to be patronising or not. The judges found um, that there was the northern qualities displayed in many of the stories. They found much of it a depressing reflection of stereotypes. The judges resisted the blandishments of a number of stories which described a North which ceased to exist decades ago, or is a figment of the literary imagination. Now, I guess I'm speaking as somebody who's written an awful lot set in the North and the Northeast and the Northwest. And when you speak to people who live in the South, or are part of the kind of literary establishment, or fancy themselves as being too, um, as having belonged to the North but no longer do, they can look back in some disdain and can be quite patronising, and accuse, people of writing about this kind of um, imagined North. And now, I guess, in the years since then, it's coalesced into it's Alan Bennett and Victoria Wood's North. Those are the voices that we hear, which are kind of beyond parody. But of course, all that still exists. And if you go to the Northeast or Yorkshire or the Northwest, anywhere, you will hear people talking like characters in any number of um, novels and stories and plays and sketches that we recognize as classics. Those stereotypes are there for a reason. They still exist. I was really struck by it going to the theatre, the Royal Exchange last week, and we saw a revival of Sheila Delaney's A Taste of Honey, and how contemporary that sounded. Things that are steeped in cliche. They're so old. We've heard them quoted by Morrissey in the 80s, by Victoria Wood in the 80s and 90s. The the kinds of sentences, the kinds of cliches spoken by those characters, and they never go out of fashion. So I'm very alert, I think, to people being snotty about fiction, especially set in the North. I always remember my long lost first agent, who I was very loyal to for quite a long time. And after I did my first three books, all set in the council estate, on the council estate where I grew up in the Northeast, she did utter the classic line, soon your work will mature and you'll start writing about people in the South, as if it was some kind of progression south, and stop writing about such working class people and start writing about middle class people. And that's the assumption that underlies so much of literary culture, and that's kind of peculiar. So I'm very alert to people talking about the cliches of the North. Anyway, enough about that. I did read this week as well Celia Brayfield's Rebel Writers. This came out a couple of years ago, and I was avid. I was keen to get it then, and I didn't. I forgot. It's her book about the generation of women who wrote in Britain in the late 50s, 60s, who carried on a career in the decades after that. And this is fascinating because the two figures that leap out of this to me are Sheila Delaney, because I'm really intrigued by her career and the way she was, much vaunted and celebrated, and she was on Broadway with her first play at 20. Meanwhile, Salford, her home city, were trashing her. There were headlines in the paper about what an awful person she was, and how she turned her back, and how she'd um, made Salford look horrible on stage. And they did things like um, she had plans to open a art centre and put her name to this project that was going on, and they scuppered that, and she was just treated really badly. I'm really interested in her career after that, the book of short stories, the films that she did with people like Albert Finney and Lindsay Anderson, things I haven't seen. So I learnt a lot about her. And again, I'm really interested in the treatment of working class voices, working class writers by the literary mainstream. Um, Nothing has changed really. Although they talk about diversity and widening participation and bringing in different voices and valuing different voices, it's not every voice, I can tell you that much. I once went to a working class writers conference in recent years where they wanted to um, highlight some of those issues, and I was asked to go and to teach a workshop, and it was very interesting. My treatment there on the day, I really felt like the hired help compared with some others. There was very much a class system still in evidence, not the one you might expect, but it was very interesting. Um, yeah, lots of issues there. The other person that this book, Celia Brayfield, talks about, that I was really interested in, is Nell Dunn, who is a wonderful writer who I've read since I was a teenager. Her book, Poor Cow, I saw the film first, and it was about a young mother called Joy who gives birth to a child at 17, and he's called Paul. And it was like, my own life in this story to an extent. There were no gangsters involved in mine. And she did a sequel in the 90s where they were, 20 odd years older. Beautiful writer. It's all about dialogue and listening with Nell. And I read Up the Junction, and in about 97, when My Silver Shoes came out, her sequel to Poor Cow, I wrote her a fan letter, and I think sent her my first novel, which was out then in paperback, and we became pals. And we had lots of lovely conversations about writing, um, and lots of letters and postcards. She has lovely, large, loopy handwriting and pale blue postcards. Um, anyway, Nell's brilliant and has had this amazing career, but never been kind of celebrated in that kind of mainstream way, in the way that lots of people have, although she's had massive successes. And reading that reminded me of a couple of years ago when I read her, I think it's her most recent release, The Muse, um, which Virago did, I think. No, Coronet, um, 2020. And this is it's a book of letters mostly, and it's about a friendship um, that's lasted all her life. It's a very short book, and there's photos and overheard snippets, and it's like dipping into somebody's private correspondence and into somebody's memories. Writing is hard. You have to keep your nerve. Often you read what you've written the day before, and it seems like total rubbish. You fall into a deep gloom. It's the honesty and clarity of how she writes that I've always loved about Nell's work. Look at that cover. There's a friend on the cover. Um, she was good friends with my friend Georgie Hammock towards the end of Georgie's life. And the last time we saw them all together was in probably 2016 in some fancy party in Queen Square for Michelle Roberts. And that was a lovely do, with a lovely meal afterwards. Anyway, I'm still going through this pile of things. This is something I suggested for book club that nobody liked. Nina Simone's Gum by Warren Ellis. About, I think it's a beautifully produced book. Maybe it's just the production I love, with all these photos and this beautiful, heavy, glossy paper. It's Faber, so it's a kind of fancy schmancy edition. Um, uh, the pictures are of something ridiculous. Um, Somebody casting chewed up chewing gum and making a silver cast of it. The story behind it, this non-fiction thing, is that he's a musician and he was in the front row for a Nina Simone concert in 1999 at the Royal Festival Hall. And one of the last she gave, I suppose. She died in the early 2000s, I think. And I believe her last concert was here in Manchester. I learnt that recently. Anyway, she'd taken out chewing gum and clagged it to the top of the grand piano she was playing. This kind of glossy, beautiful piano, and the gum gets stuck there, and she plays and finishes. And she kept dashing off to take cocaine and eat sausages, apparently, and then ran back and sang some more and hectored the audience, and eventually left. But the gum was still there, and your fellow Warren Ellis jumped on the stage, took the gum, wrapped it up, and kept it for years. And then years later realizes he's got this holy relic and gets it cast in silver or something during the pandemic as a project, as an art project, and puts it in a frame, and it goes into an exhibition. And I thought it was a lovely story, and I was alerted to it by Robin Ince in his book Bibliomaniac, because he raves about it. I suggested it to book club, and everybody hated it. They thought it was the most self-indulgent crap. But then you realize that everybody in book club um, was kind of allergic to the idea of hoarding and keeping crap, especially bits of old chewing gum. So it just set off alarm bells for all of them. I thought it was nicely done, but yes, socks. When you sit and hear that everybody hates it, it does put you off a bit sometimes. I thought, was it just me that thought it was good? What else is here? Okay, socks, you sit. You can't see you in the camera. Look, 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 look. There, there. Two Doctor Who books that belong together from the end of the New Adventures in the mid-90s. Lung Barrow by Mark Platt and The Dying Days by Lance Parkin, two favourites. And these were the things that came out about the time that I was thinking, I've got to write my own Doctor Who book. And I thought, I'll see what's happening now. And had my mind blown in June 1997. My little note at the front of this says that Lungbara reminds me of Gormenghast and Cold Comfort Farm. It's the story set at the very end of the Seventh Doctor's life, when he goes back to Gallifrey to meet his family, and we meet his peculiar family on Gallifrey. And there's lots of returns of older characters, lots of mysteries cleared up, lots of further mysteries invented. They stood in a line beside the TARDIS. Please, he said, I didn't ask to be seen off. Tough, said Dorothy, which is the kind of grown-up ace. You'd better have these. She fished her last battered box of tea bags out of her pocket. He took them and hugged her tight. He looked fondly at Leela for a long time, peering into her eyes, as if he recognized something there. This love thing, he mused. Interesting. A father from Gallifrey and a mother of Earth stock. That's an unusual pedigree. She pushed back her hair and said awkwardly, I don't have anything for you, Doctor. Just call him after me. She looked startled and then nodded. That's the big hint that I forgot about, that Leela is pregnant with the Doctor himself. Don't know if they ever followed that up. I hope they did. She looked startled and then nodded. What exactly is the terrible Zodin? Butted in Chris. Some sort of galactic megalomaniac emperor? The Doctor's eyes went misty. Zodin was a celebrated sword swallower at the grand festival of Zemimi's Midmore. She had an amazing trick with a scimitar. Chris grabbed the Doctor, lifting him off his feet. in a monstrous bear hug. Rose bet me I'd never dare do this, he said. Eventually he put the doctor down again and picked up his hat for him. Give my love to Bernice, said the doctor, squeezing Chris's hand. And ask her if she wants to lecture here at the academy, said Romana. She turned to the doctor. I know, I'll be careful, he said. I want you to have this. She slipped a metallic object into his hand. It's my sonic screwdriver. He smiled. Thank you, Madam President. I shall see you soon, back at the Capitol. He walked to the TARDIS, a small figure clutching his presents. He turned his key and went inside. One by one they moved away. Will he come back? Said Leela. Dorothy. The doctor's head re-emerged from the door. I just remembered I haven't been Merlin yet. He vanished and the door closed. What? Chorused the others, as Dorothy began to laugh. The light on the TARDIS flashed like a bright idea. A flock of startled birds rose from the trees and the TARDIS grated out of existence. Then they were alone on the sunny mountainside. It's like an end to the whole series in a way. It's an end to that period of Doctor Who which took place after the TV show originally finished, pulling together loads of threads. And then within a month, we had the follow-up with the Eighth Doctor in London, with UNIT based under the Tower of London. We've got Ice Warriors and Bernice and the Brigadier, and it's Lance Parkin. So it's a good, adventurous, clever story. And what strikes me is how much of this stuff we eventually saw in the TV show later on. The feeling of it, the idea of it being this kind of vast saga that can draw upon any part of its own history, and not in a kind of self-indulgent way, in a way that makes new stories. Mythos, as they now call it. Anyway, I'm going to stop there because I'm over time. I'm going to stop and then start again, I think, and talk about some more of these things that I've dug out. But I'll stop for now. Okay. Goodbye. See you soon in the next episode.